The contraction hit like a freight train at 3:47 a.m., and I knew this was it. After 41 weeks of pregnancy, my daughter was finally ready to make her entrance into the world. What I didn't know, as I fumbled for my phone to call the hospital, was that in less than 6 hours, I would discover that my husband of 8 years had systematically destroyed our financial life while I was bringing his child into the world. The first sign something was wrong came when I tried to pay for parking at Mercy General Hospital. My credit card was declined. Then the second one. Then the third. Standing there in the fluorescent-lit payment kiosk, doubled over with another contraction, watching the screen flash declined in angry red letters, I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with labor pains. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The parking attendant, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, had come out of her booth. "You look like you're about to." "I'm in labor," I managed between gritted teeth. "But my cards aren't working." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it, honey. Park wherever you need to. We'll figure it out later." But even as she spoke, I was already reaching for my phone, pulling up my banking app with trembling fingers. My name is Layla James Morgan, I'm 32 years old, and up until that moment, I had considered myself one of the lucky ones. Married to Hugo Morgan, a successful regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, living in our dream house in Westbrook Heights, pregnant with our first child after 3 years of trying. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job as a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates to prepare for motherhood, trusting that Hugo's income and our substantial savings would carry us through. I was a woman who had always prided herself on being prepared, on reading the fine print, on having backup plans. I'd built my career on analyzing risk and spotting financial red flags. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been completely blindsided by the man sleeping next to me every night. The banking app loaded, and what I saw made my knees buckle. Our joint checking account, $47. 23, our joint savings, $0. 00, our emergency fund, closed. Our investment account, liquidated. 8 years of careful financial planning, gone. Another contraction ripped through me, and I had to grab the parking meter for support. The attendant rushed over. "Honey, you need to get inside. Now." "I need to call my husband," I whispered. "You can call him from labor and delivery." "Come on, let me help you." But even as she guided me toward the hospital entrance, I was scrolling through more accounts on my phone. The credit cards, all 5 of them, had been canceled yesterday. Our home equity line of credit had been maxed out and closed. Even my separate personal savings account, which Hugo had access to for emergencies, had been drained to less than $100. Hugo answered on the first ring. "Layla? Is it time? Where's our money, Hugo?" The words came out flat, controlled, even as another contraction built. A pause. Too long of a pause. "What do you mean? Are you at the hospital?" "I'm coming now. I mean our checking account has $47 in it. I mean all our credit cards are canceled. I mean I'm standing in a hospital parking lot in active labor and I can't even pay for parking because you've destroyed our entire financial life." The silence stretched. In the background of his call, I could hear what sounded like airport announcements. "Hugo? Where are you?" I had to take an emergency business trip. But I'm coming back now." "Layla, I can explain everything." "You better," I said, and hung up. The next 8 hours passed in a blur of pain, medication, and the miraculous arrival of my daughter, Mia Rose Morgan. She was perfect, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of pure possibility, with Hugo's dark hair and what looked like my stubborn chin. But even as I held her for the first time, even as the overwhelming rush of maternal love flooded through me, I couldn't shake the cold dread that had settled in my chest. Hugo arrived just as I was being moved to recovery, his suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled, clutching a bouquet of grocery store flowers. He looked like a man who'd been running from something. Layla, she's beautiful, he breathed, reaching for Mia. She looks just like you. I pulled her closer to my chest. Where's our money, Hugo? Can we talk about this later? You just gave birth. This should be a happy moment. This is exactly when we need to talk about it. I have a newborn baby and no way to pay for anything. Where is our money? He sank into the visitor's chair, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. There were some investments that went bad. I was trying to make it back before you noticed. Investments? I kept my voice level, but something was crystallizing in my mind. What kind of investments? And why were you at an airport this morning? Layla, please. Let's not do this now. But I was already reaching for my phone again, pulling up location sharing. Hugo's phone had been in Las Vegas for the past 3 days. Truth is, I wasn't completely surprised. The signs had been there for months, maybe longer, but I'd been so focused on the pregnancy, so ready to trust the man I'd built a life with, that I'd dismissed my own instincts. It started small, like these things always do. Hugo had become secretive about his phone, taking calls in the garage or stepping outside to check in with the office. He'd started working later, claiming new client demands, but when I'd called his office once to leave a message, his assistant had seemed confused about the overtime. There were the unexplained absences. Weekend conferences that hadn't appeared on any professional calendars I could find. Business trips that he couldn't provide details about afterward. When I'd asked about his travel reimbursements, he'd grown defensive, saying the company had changed their policy. His spending habits had shifted too. Hugo had always been careful with money, it was one of the things that had initially attracted me to him. But suddenly he had new clothes, expensive ones, that he claimed were necessary for maintaining his professional image. A new watch that he said was a bonus gift from his company. New golf clubs, a upgraded gym membership, dinners out with clients that he couldn't tell me much about. Most telling was how he'd started handling our finances. For 8 years, we'd maintained complete transparency about money. We'd built our budget together, made investment decisions together, reviewed our accounts monthly like clockwork. But gradually, Hugo had taken over more of the day-to-day financial management, saying he wanted to spare me the stress while I was pregnant. You should be focusing on growing our baby, he'd said with such apparent concern. Let me handle the boring money stuff. I'd felt grateful. Here was my husband, stepping up to shoulder more responsibility as we prepared for parenthood. What I didn't realize was that he was systematically removing my access to our financial life, changing passwords, redirecting statements to his work email, and slowly consolidating control over every account we owned. The gambling should have been obvious. Hugo had always enjoyed poker nights with friends, but those had become more frequent. He'd started talking about systems and sure things, using language that I recognized from my work with problem gamblers' financial recovery cases. When I'd gently suggested that maybe he was spending too much time at the casino, he'd laughed it off. It's not gambling when you know what you're doing, he'd said. I'm actually pretty good at this. But the real warning sign had been his treatment of our relationship itself. The distance that had grown between us wasn't just physical, though that had been part of it. Hugo had become less interested in our conversations, less engaged with our plans for the baby, less present even when he was home. It was as if he was already preparing to be somewhere else. The night before I went into labor, he'd been on his phone constantly, texting with someone he claimed was a work contact. When I'd finally fallen asleep around midnight, he'd still been awake, the glow of his screen illuminating his face in the darkness. So I'd made some quiet moves of my own. 3 months ago, when Hugo's behavior had become impossible to ignore, I'd started documenting everything. Screenshots of bank statements before they could be altered or hidden. Photos of credit card bills that came to the house. Records of his location sharing data, which he'd forgotten he'd enabled on our family plan. I'd even started recording some of our financial conversations, using an app that I'd downloaded for work purposes. I'd opened a new bank account at a different institution, one that Hugo had no access to or knowledge of. I'd been quietly funneling money into it, not much, just small amounts that wouldn't be noticed. Cash back from grocery trips, money from selling some of my old professional clothes online, even the small freelance consulting fee I'd earned from helping my former colleague with a project. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was mine. I'd also made copies of every important document we owned, insurance policies, tax returns, mortgage papers, investment statements, and stored them in a safety deposit box that Hugo didn't know about. I'd contacted our insurance companies to ensure that no changes could be made to our policies without my direct authorization. Most importantly, I'd researched my rights. I'd spent hours reading about financial abuse, about asset recovery, about what protections were available to women in my situation. Your signature was forged, Rick said grimly. We'll need to have a handwriting expert confirm it, but it's clearly not your signature. The loan was for $85,000, and that money disappeared into various casino accounts within days of the loan being processed. The room seemed to spin. So we owe $85,000 more on our house, and we don't have any of that money. Correct. But there's more. Maria pulled out another set of documents. He also opened 3 credit cards in your name using your social security number and forged signatures. Those cards were maxed out and closed for non-payment. I was too stunned to speak. Mia stirred in her bassinet, making the soft mewing sounds that meant she was about to wake up for another feeding. Looking at her perfect, innocent face, I felt rage building in my chest like I'd never experienced before. What about this Melissa James? Rick exchanged a look with Maria. We're still investigating, but it appears that your husband has been in a relationship with Ms. James for approximately 6 months. She works at one of the casinos he frequents. Based on financial records, he's spent approximately $34,000 on her during that time period. $34,000, I repeated slowly. Hotel rooms, jewelry, a car lease in her name, apartment rent, Maria confirmed. All paid for with money from your joint accounts. I reached for Mia as she began to fuss, holding her close while I processed the full scope of Hugo's betrayal. He hadn't just gambled away our money, he'd stolen it to fund a relationship with another woman while his pregnant wife trusted him to manage their finances. What are my options? I asked. Rick pulled out a legal pad. Several, and they're all good. First, the forged signatures constitute identity theft and fraud. Those are felonies. Second, the unauthorized use of marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship gives you significant leverage in divorce proceedings. Third, the pattern of financial abuse and the timing, doing this while you were pregnant and then while you were in labor, will not reflect well on him in any legal proceeding. But can I get our money back? Some of it, yes. The house situation can be resolved. The mortgage company will have to reverse the loan once we prove the signature was forged. The credit cards opened in your name can be reversed for the same reason. As for the money he gambled away, Rick shrugged. That's harder to recover, but we can certainly go after any assets he has, including his salary and any assets he's purchased for this other woman. Maria leaned forward. Mrs. Morgan, I need to ask you something important. Do you have any reason to believe that your husband knows you're taking these steps? No, I said immediately. He thinks I'm a trusting wife who just gave birth and isn't thinking clearly. Good. Because I suspect there's more money hidden somewhere. The amounts we've found don't add up to his salary over the past 8 months. Either he's got accounts we haven't found yet, or he's stashed cash somewhere. Rick nodded. We're going to need to move quickly. I'm going to file for an emergency restraining order to prevent him from making any more financial moves. We'll also need to report the identity theft to the police and the credit agencies. But first, we need to make sure you and Mia are safe. Safe? People who steal this much money, who plan this extensively, they don't usually go quietly when they're caught. And Hugo doesn't know yet that he's been caught. That night, after Rick and his team had left, after I'd fed Mia and tried to get some rest, I lay awake thinking about the 8 years I'd spent building a life with Hugo. The house we'd saved for together, the trips we'd taken, the 1,000 small conversations about our future. Had any of it been real? Or had I been married to a stranger all along? My phone buzzed with a text from Hugo. Layla, I'm sorry about today. I know you're upset, but we can work through this. I love you and Mia. I'm going to make this right. I almost laughed. He still thought he could manage this situation, still thought he could control the narrative. He had no idea that while he'd been systematically destroying our life, I'd been quietly documenting everything. He had no idea that I now had a team of professionals working to unravel his lies. Most of all, he had no idea that the trusting, dependent wife he thought he'd left in the hospital was about to become his worst nightmare. I turned off my phone and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The investigation into Hugo's crimes expanded rapidly once Rick's team got involved. Within 48 hours of my discharge from the hospital, we had a complete picture of the financial devastation, and it was worse than anyone had initially suspected. Maria Santos had been right, there was more money, and Hugo had been far more sophisticated in hiding it than we'd first realized. Working with a team that included a private investigator, a computer forensics specialist, and a paralegal who specialized in financial crimes, we uncovered a complex web of hidden accounts, forged documents, and systematic theft that spanned nearly 2 years. The breakthrough came when the computer forensics specialist, James Wong, managed to access Hugo's laptop, which he'd conveniently left at home when he'd rushed to Las Vegas for what I now understood was an extended gambling binge with Melissa James. Your husband kept very detailed records, James told me during our meeting at Rick's office. Mia was sleeping in her car seat beside my chair, blissfully unaware that her father's crimes were being methodically documented around her. He has spreadsheets tracking his gambling wins and losses, records of money transferred to accounts in Melissa James's name, even a calendar showing when he planned various thefts to coincide with your pregnancy appointments. He planned this around my doctor's visits? Appears so. Look at this. James turned his laptop screen toward me. Here's an entry from 3 months ago. Layla OB appointment 2 to 4 p.m. Transfer $8,000 from savings to Bitcoin account. And here's another one. Layla ultrasound Tuesday morning. Close HELEC and move funds to Vegas account. I stared at the screen, feeling sick. While I'd been at appointments to check on our baby's development, Hugo had been timing his thefts to my absence. Rick leaned forward. Layla, this level of planning demonstrates clear intent to defraud. It also shows that he was specifically targeting your pregnancy as an opportunity to steal. That's going to be very compelling to a prosecutor. The private investigator, Linda Hayes, had been equally thorough in documenting Hugo's relationship with Melissa James. They've been together for 8 months, she reported. She's 24, works as a VIP host at the Bellagio, which essentially means she manages high-rolling gamblers. She's been posting on social media about expensive gifts from her generous boyfriend, including the car lease we found, jewelry, and trips to San Francisco and Hawaii. Linda spread out printed screenshots across Rick's conference table. Here she is wearing a $4,000 necklace that was purchased with a credit card linked to your joint checking account. Here's the car he leased for her, a BMW convertible, $847 a month. And here are photos from their trip to Hawaii last month while you were 7 months pregnant. The photos were like physical blows. Hugo and this young woman on beaches I'd dreamed of visiting, in restaurants we couldn't afford, living a life funded by money stolen from his pregnant wife. In one photo, Melissa was wearing a dress I recognized. I'd seen the charge on our credit card statement and Hugo had claimed it was a gift for his sister's birthday. But here's the interesting part, Linda continued. Melissa James has been posting about moving in with her boyfriend and planning a future together. Based on her social media activity, she believes Hugo is divorced and independently wealthy. She has no idea he's married or that the money he's spending on her is stolen. This information shifted something in my perspective. While I was furious at this woman for participating in the destruction of my family, it appeared that she was as much a victim of Hugo's lies as I was. He'd created an entirely fictional life to justify his theft. There's something else, Maria Santos said, consulting her notes. Hugo has been filing false tax returns. He's been claiming gambling losses to reduce his tax liability, but those losses don't match his actual gambling activity. He's been inflating his losses to avoid paying taxes on his salary, then using the extra money to fund his gambling and his relationship with Ms. James. Rick looked up from his legal pad. That's tax fraud, a federal crime. This case is getting bigger, Layla. Over the next week, while I navigated the exhausting reality of caring for a newborn, Rick's team continued building the case against Hugo. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records showing systematic theft, forged signatures on loans and credit applications, fraudulent tax filings, and detailed digital records of Hugo's planning and execution of his crimes. But Hugo himself had vanished. His phone was going straight to voicemail. His office claimed he was on extended personal leave. His credit card activity showed he was still in Las Vegas, but when Linda Hayes contacted the hotels he'd been using, they said he'd checked out with no forwarding address. He knows, Rick said during our meeting on Friday afternoon. Something spooked him, and he's gone into hiding. How could he know? I haven't talked to him since that phone call at the hospital. Could be any number of things. Maybe he tried to access an account that's now frozen. Maybe Melissa James saw something that made her suspicious. Maybe he just realized he'd left too much evidence behind. I felt a chill. What does this mean for getting our money back? It makes it more complicated, but not impossible. We've already recovered the funds from the fraudulent mortgage. The bank reversed that transaction as soon as we proved the signature was forged. The credit cards opened in your name have been cancelled and the debts reversed. But the money he gambled away or spent on Ms. James, that's going to depend on finding him and any assets he might have hidden. That evening, I was feeding Mia and trying to process everything that had happened when my doorbell rang. Through the security camera Hugo had installed last year, I could see a young woman with long black hair and expensive-looking clothes standing on my front porch. Melissa James. I considered not answering, but something about her body language, the way she was nervously shifting from foot to foot, the way she kept looking over her shoulder, made me curious. I put Mia in her bouncer and went to the door. "Are you Layla?" she asked as soon as I opened it. Up close, she was even younger than I'd expected, with the kind of polished appearance that came from high-end salons and designer boutiques. But her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "I am. And you're Melissa." She nodded, tears starting to flow. "I think we need to talk." I should have slammed the door. This woman had been living off my stolen money while I'd been pregnant with my husband's child. But something in her expression stopped me. She looked as devastated as I felt. "Come in," I said. Melissa James's story filled in the final pieces of Hugo's deception. Sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where Hugo and I had planned our budget every month for 8 years, she told me about the elaborate lies he'd constructed to justify his lifestyle. "He told me he was divorced," she said, accepting the cup of tea I'd offered. "He said his ex-wife had been emotionally abusive and had taken half his money in the divorce, but that he was rebuilding his life. He showed me documents, bank statements, investment accounts, salary information, that made it look like he was wealthy. Those were our real accounts," I said quietly. "I know that now. But at the time, he was so convincing. He said he was looking for someone to start fresh with, someone who could appreciate the finer things in life because he'd learned how short life could be." She pulled out her phone and showed me a text conversation. "Look at this. From last week." The messages were from Hugo. "Baby, I'm about to close the biggest deal of my career. By the time you see me again, we'll be set for life. Start looking at houses in San Francisco like we talked about." He was planning to move you to San Francisco? With the money from selling his house in Portland. Except it wasn't his house, was it? It was your house. I nodded, feeling nauseous again. I found out the truth yesterday, Melissa continued. Hugo had left his email open on my laptop, and I saw messages from his work saying they were concerned about his extended absence. That didn't make sense because he'd told me he was on a planned vacation. So I started looking deeper. She pulled out a folder of printed emails. I found emails from his boss asking why he hadn't shown up for important meetings. I found messages from someone named Rick Morrison about legal proceedings. And I found. She paused, looking directly at me. I found photos of you. Pregnant. In a hospital. He had photos of me in his email? Pictures someone had sent him. Text messages asking about the baby. Layla, I realized that not only was Hugo married, but that his wife had just given birth. That all the money he'd been spending on me had been stolen from you while you were pregnant with his child. I stared at her, trying to process this information. What did you do? I confronted him. He tried to lie at first, said you were his ex-wife and the baby wasn't his. But I'd seen the birth certificate in one of his emails, Mia Rose Morgan. His name was listed as the father. Where is he now? I don't know. After I confronted him, he packed his things and left. He said he needed to take care of some business but that he'd be back for me. That was 3 days ago. She looked around my kitchen, taking in the baby supplies scattered on the counters, the evidence of the real life Hugo had been living. I don't think he's coming back. Melissa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are there bank accounts or assets in your name that contain money Hugo gave you? She nodded miserably. He opened a checking account in my name and deposited money for living expenses. There's about $12,000 in it right now. And he bought me jewelry, paid for my car lease, gave me cash for shopping and bills. I'm going to give you the number for my attorney. You need to call him today. Why would you help me? I was with your husband. I helped him spend your money. Because you didn't know. And because if you cooperate with the investigation, there's a chance we can recover more of what was stolen. That money in your account? It belongs to my daughter. The car lease, the jewelry, all of it was bought with money stolen from Mia's college fund. Melissa started crying again. I'm so sorry. I really thought he loved me. I thought we were building a life together. He used both of us, I said. The difference is, I'm going to make sure he pays for it. After Melissa left, I called Rick immediately and told him about our conversation. Within hours, Melissa was in his office, turning over bank records, jewelry, and access to the car Hugo had leased in her name. More importantly, she was providing detailed information about Hugo's activities in Las Vegas, his gambling patterns, and his future plans. The net was closing around Hugo Morgan, but the man himself remained elusive. That changed on Wednesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after Mia's birth, when Linda Hayes called with news that would bring everything to a head. We found him, she said. And Layla, you're not going to believe where he is. Hugo Morgan, it turned out, had not fled to Mexico or hidden in some remote location. He was 60 miles away, living in a luxury extended-stay hotel near the airport, apparently planning his next move. He's been there for 5 days, Linda reported during our emergency meeting at Rick's office. Using a credit card in Melissa James's name, one she didn't know about. He's been ordering room service, using the hotel spa, and based on surveillance footage, he's been working on his laptop for hours every day. Working on what? We don't know yet, but we have a theory. The hotel has business services, computers, printers, internet access. We think he might be creating new identity documents or trying to move money to offshore accounts. Rick leaned forward. Layla, we need to move fast. If Hugo is planning to flee the country or hide assets internationally, every day we wait makes recovery less likely. What do you recommend? We set a trap. The plan Rick's team developed was elegant in its simplicity. Using information provided by Melissa James, we would lure Hugo back into the open by convincing him that his situation wasn't as dire as he'd feared. Melissa agreed to contact Hugo, telling him that she'd been questioned by investigators but had managed to deflect suspicion. She would suggest that they meet to plan their next steps, claiming that she'd found a way to liquidate her assets and join him in fleeing the country. He's desperate, Rick explained. He's isolated, he's running out of money, and he's probably convinced himself that he can still salvage this situation. If Melissa offers him hope and a solution, he'll take the bait. The meeting was set for Friday afternoon at a restaurant near Hugo's hotel. Linda Hayes and her team would be conducting surveillance, while Rick and a prosecutor from the district attorney's office would be standing by with warrants for Hugo's arrest. But Hugo Morgan had one more surprise for all of us. Friday morning, I woke to find Mia fussier than usual. She'd been eating well and sleeping reasonably well for a 2-week-old, but that morning she seemed inconsolable. I was walking her around the living room, trying to calm her, when I noticed a car in my driveway. Hugo's car. My blood went cold. According to our plan, he was supposed to be at the hotel, preparing for his meeting with Melissa. He wasn't supposed to be here, at our house, where I was alone with our baby. I grabbed my phone and called 911, then immediately called Rick. He's here, I whispered into the phone. Hugo's at the house. Stay on the line and don't answer the door, Rick said immediately. I'm calling Linda and the police. But even as I spoke, I heard Hugo's key in the front door lock. He still had his key. In all the chaos of the past 2 weeks, I'd never thought to change the locks. Layla? Hugo's voice called from the entryway. Layla, I know you're here. We need to talk. I ran upstairs with Mia, locking myself in the master bedroom and trying to quiet her crying while staying on the phone with Rick. Layla, please, Hugo called from downstairs. I just want to see my daughter. I want to explain everything. His footsteps were on the stairs now. I could hear him moving through the house, opening doors, looking for us. Layla, I know you're scared, but you don't understand the whole situation. People are trying to frame me. That lawyer you hired, those investigators, they're not telling you the truth. He was outside the bedroom door now. I could see the handle turning. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said through the door. The gambling got out of control, but I was winning. I was actually ahead for a while. I was going to pay everything back before you ever knew it was gone. The door opened. Hugo stood in the doorway, and I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his hair was unwashed, and his clothes were wrinkled. But most shocking was his expression. There was something desperate and unhinged in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Hugo, the police are coming, I said, holding Mia tightly. You need to leave. The police? He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Layla, I'm not the criminal here. That lawyer of yours, Rick Morrison? He's been stealing money from his clients for years. He's using you to cover his own crimes. That's not true. It is true. I have proof. That's what I've been working on all week, gathering evidence that Morrison has been embezzling from his trust accounts. He's planning to frame me and disappear with what's left of our money. For just a moment, doubt flickered through my mind. Hugo sounded so certain, so convinced of his version of events. But then Mia cried, and I looked down at my daughter's perfect face, and I remembered everything I'd learned over the past 2 weeks. Hugo, stop. I've seen the bank records. I've seen your gambling receipts. I've seen the emails to Melissa James. I know about the forged signatures and the hidden accounts. Rick Morrison didn't do any of that, you did. Layla, you have to believe me. I'm trying to save our family. Our family? I stood up, still holding Mia. You destroyed our family. You stole from your pregnant wife. You canceled our credit cards while I was in labor. You've been living with another woman while I was home planning for our baby. Melissa was a mistake. She meant nothing. She meant $34,000. She meant our daughter's college fund. Hugo's expression shifted, and I saw a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. Layla, please. I can fix this. We can start over. All three of us. Start over with what? You've stolen everything we had. Not everything. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I saved some. For us. For Mia. He held out the envelope and I could see it was full of cash. $20,000. It's enough to start fresh somewhere. We can leave Portland, change our names, build a new life. I stared at him, finally understanding that Hugo wasn't just a thief or a liar. He was completely delusional. He genuinely believed that after everything he'd done, I would run away with him and help him hide from the consequences of his crimes. Hugo, I'm not going anywhere with you. And that money belongs to the people you stole from. Hand it over. No. His voice turned hard. This is for my family. For my daughter. Your daughter will be better off without you. That's when Hugo snapped. He lunged forward, not toward me, but toward Mia. I jerked backward, clutching her to my chest, but Hugo was faster. He grabbed my arm, trying to take the baby from me. She's my daughter too, he said through gritted teeth. I have rights. Let go of me. We struggled for a moment, and Mia began screaming. The sound seemed to bring Hugo back to his senses, and he released my arm, stepping backward. I'm sorry, he said, looking horrified at his own actions. I didn't mean. I would never hurt Mia. You already have hurt her. You've stolen her future. That's when we heard the sirens. Hugo heard them too. He looked toward the window, then back at me, and I saw him make a decision. Layla, last chance. Come with me now, or I'll make sure you never see a penny of that money again. I'll disappear, and I'll take everything with me. Go ahead, I said. Run. Hide. Spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. But you'll never see Mia again. The sirens were getting closer. Hugo kissed his fingers and reached toward Mia, as if to touch her forehead, but I stepped away. Goodbye, Layla, he said. Then he turned and ran down the stairs. Through the bedroom window, I watched him throw the envelope of cash into his car and speed out of the driveway, just as 3 police cars turned onto our street. The manhunt for Hugo Morgan lasted exactly 18 hours. He was arrested at the Canadian border, trying to cross with a fake passport and carrying $23,000 in cash. According to the arresting officers, he'd claimed to be heading to Vancouver for a business meeting, but the passport he presented had been poorly forged and immediately flagged by border security. The arrest triggered a comprehensive search of Hugo's hotel room, his car, and his personal effects. What investigators found exceeded everyone's expectations for both the scope of his crimes and the likelihood of recovering stolen assets. Your husband is an idiot, Linda Hayes told me bluntly during our debriefing meeting. And thank God for that. Hugo had kept detailed records of everything. Not just the gambling and theft I'd already discovered, but additional crimes going back 3 years. Hidden bank accounts, fraudulent loan applications, forged documents, and even tax evasion schemes I'd never suspected. He has a ledger, Maria Santos reported, spreading documents across Rick's conference table. Written in his own handwriting, documenting every dollar he stole, every document he forged, every lie he told. It's like he was keeping score. The ledger revealed that Hugo's crimes totaled more than $340,000 over 3 years. He'd been supplementing his salary with stolen money from our accounts, fraudulent loans, and even embezzlement from his employer's expense accounts. But more importantly, the ledger led investigators to $127,000 in hidden assets. Bank accounts in false names, safety deposit boxes, and even a storage unit full of expensive electronics he'd purchased with stolen money and planned to resell. "This is actually good news for you," Rick explained. "Between the recovered cash, the assets we can liquidate, and the restitution requirements from his criminal conviction, you should be able to recover most of what was stolen." The criminal charges against Hugo Morgan were extensive: identity theft, fraud, forgery, tax evasion, embezzlement, and domestic financial abuse. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Walsh, seemed personally offended by the timing of Hugo's crimes. "Stealing from a pregnant wife is particularly egregious," she told me during one of our meetings. "Juries don't like men who victimize pregnant women. Mr. Morgan is looking at significant prison time." Hugo's employer, once they learned about the expense account fraud, terminated him immediately and filed their own criminal charges. His professional licenses were suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. But for me, the most satisfying moment came during Hugo's arraignment, which I attended with Mia sleeping peacefully in her carrier. Hugo looked terrible. 3 weeks of legal jeopardy had taken a visible toll. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight loss or the dark circles under his eyes. When he saw me sitting in the gallery with Mia, he actually began crying. "How does the defendant plead to the charges of identity theft in the first degree?" the judge asked. Hugo's lawyer, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, conferred quietly with his client before answering. "Not guilty, Your Honor." I almost laughed. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, Hugo was maintaining his innocence. The judge set bail at $150,000, which Hugo couldn't afford, and scheduled a preliminary hearing for the following month. As Hugo was led away in handcuffs, he turned back toward me. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and I saw him mouth the words, "I'm sorry." I looked down at Mia, then back at my husband, and shook my head. Sorry wasn't enough. The resolution of Hugo's case unfolded over the next 6 months with methodical precision. Despite his initial not guilty plea, the evidence against him was so overwhelming that his attorney quickly began negotiating a plea agreement. In exchange for pleading guilty to all charges and providing complete cooperation in asset recovery, Hugo's sentence was reduced from a potential 25 years to 8 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, including his former employer and, of course, Mia and me. The financial recovery exceeded Rick's initial projections. Between the hidden assets Hugo had accumulated, the reversal of fraudulent loans and credit accounts, and the liquidation of property he'd purchased with stolen money, we recovered approximately 85% of what had been stolen. More importantly, the house was saved. The mortgage company not only reversed the fraudulent second mortgage but also agreed to modify our payment terms to account for my reduced income during maternity leave. But the most unexpected resolution came from Melissa James. 2 months after Hugo's arrest, Melissa contacted me directly. She'd been cooperating fully with the investigation and had returned everything Hugo had given her: jewelry, car payments, even money from the account he'd opened in her name. "I want to do more," she told me during a coffee meeting. "I want to help make this right." Melissa had been deeply affected by her role in Hugo's crimes, even though she'd been an unwitting victim herself. She'd left her job at the casino and enrolled in college, planning to study social work with a focus on helping victims of financial abuse. "What happened to us, to you and to me, it happens to other women all the time," she said. "Men who lie and steal and manipulate to fund their addictions or their affairs. I want to help prevent it." Hugo Morgan had stolen our money, lied to our faces, and betrayed our trust at the most vulnerable moment of our lives. But he'd also shown me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more capable than I'd ever believed, and more deserving of real love than I'd ever known. As the bailiff led Hugo away to begin his 8-year sentence, I kissed Mia's head and whispered, "Ready to go home, baby girl?" She clapped her hands and babbled something that sounded like mama, and we walked out of that courtroom together, free from the man who'd tried to destroy us and ready for whatever came next. The sun was shining as we stepped outside, and Mia reached up toward the bright sky with both hands, as if she could grab hold of the whole beautiful world. She was her mother's daughter, fearless, determined, and absolutely unstoppable. And she was exactly right. The whole beautiful world was hers for the taking.